Connecticut State University's Election Connection. I'm Jason Ferenzi.
And I'm David Kuhn. Tonight we're going to be covering the 5th Congressional District debate between Johanna Hayes and Manny Santos at the Portuguese Cultural Center in Danbury. And it's going to be a big debate, we can guarantee that.
Absolutely. On the Democratic side, we see Johanna Hayes. She's a former educator of JFK High School in Waterbury, Connecticut. She won the 2015 Teacher of the Year award from that school and the 2016 National Teacher Award.
And Manny Santos, interestingly, is an immigrant from Portugal. He moved here when he was just a kid, and he lived in Hartford, and he became the mayor of Meriden in 2013, lost his re-election bid on that, tried to become a city council member, lost his re-election bid on that, and now he's running for U.S. Congress, so we'll see how he fares.
Yeah, and I think this is a very important election for Connecticut and an election for the House of Representatives.
Absolutely, yeah. The midterms this year are massive, and the thing everyone's talking about is what is the effect going to be on a national level. And when we talk about the two houses, of course, we've got Senate and House of Representatives seats up for grabs. The Senate is pretty safe. It doesn't look like it's going to flip from Republicans, but as far as the Congress is concerned, it's very possible it could flip to Democrats, and that could cause an impeachment process for the president, which would be a huge situation.
Yeah, and I mean, we're seeing from both sides, we're seeing, Manny Santos is very Trump Republican. He backs many of the stances that our president takes, and we see Johanna Hayes is a very progressive Democrat. So I think with her, we're going to see more of the stances that we've seen in Connecticut and more of what the voters have been wanting.
Well, absolutely. It's like the national conversation is boiled down to this district in so many ways. And one of the biggest issues that these two candidates talk about is immigration, and they are starkly divided on the subject. Manny Santos is a huge proponent of strong borders. He's an advocate for building the wall and basically supporting most of the Trump administration's moves on the issue.
Yeah, we're gonna send it over to Ryan right now. So Ryan, what do you have for us?
The 2018 Connecticut midterm elections are going to be super interesting this year. We have the Republicans looking to unseat the Democratic trifecta that's control of the state's governor's office and the offices of state Senate and the state House. So in the governor's race, we have Democrat Ned Lamont, Republican Bob Stefanowski, and independent candidate Oz Griebel. Democrat Dan Malloy will not seek re-election this year, so look for this race to be incredibly interesting. The Connecticut Independent Party has actually endorsed Bob Stefanowski, so look for Stefanowski to take some of those votes from Griebel and try to unseat Ned Lamont as the favorite in this election. Moving on to the State Senate, District 25, we have incumbent Bob Duff, who's held that seat since 2005. He's going to be taking on Mark D'Amelio, Republican. District 34, we'll see Len Fasano, who's held that seat since 2003, take on newcomer Eileen McKean. And moving on to the State House, we're going to see incumbent Democrat Joe Arasimowicz take on newcomer Stephen Balashevsky. He was unopposed in the Republican Party primary. Moving on to District 114, we'll see newcomer Democrat Mary Waylander take on incumbent Republican Themis Kouritis. She's held that seat since 1999. For the Office of Attorney General, incumbent George C. Jepson isn't seeking re-election this term, so we'll see William Tong, Democrat, and Republican Susan Hatfield. For the Office of Treasurer, we have two more newcomers. We have Sean Wooden, who's a Democrat, and Thad Gray, a Republican. Neither of them were opposed in their party's primaries. And for the office of the U.S. House, the 4th District, we have incumbent Jim Himes, who's served since 2007, take on Republican Harry Aurora. And for the 5th District, we have 2016 National Teacher of the Year, Johanna Hayes. She's a Democrat. She's going to take on Manny Santos, Republican. And then moving on to the U.S. Senate, we have incumbent Chris Murphy, who's won every year since 2006, take on newcomer Matthew Corey. He won 70.6% of his party's primary votes. Back to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important with all of the different elections up right now. And you did mention the immigration stances of Manny Santos, but we see Johanna Hayes. She's trying to work towards more of a better legal pathway for illegal immigrants to for immigrants to seek citizenship. She was a proponent of the DREAM Act for illegal alien minors. and she just supports just kind of granting citizenship in an easier way for them. But I think it's going to be a really important night tonight, for both of them. Yeah,
well, absolutely. And interestingly, immigration is a huge topic in Connecticut, and it's a very popular topic for Democrats as well. We've seen Chris Murphy, Senator Blumenthal, both going out and really advocating for a lot of these immigrants that are stuck in, tough situations where they're being deported, having to seek refuge in churches. Blumenthal and Murphy have actually gone to visit those guys. So for Democrats, it's definitely an issue that binds them together, and it's a popular one, and it's one that gets them excited to vote. So to see Jahana Hayes as such a strong advocate for it is not too much of a surprise, I wouldn't say.
Yeah. So right now we have footage of the Portuguese Center in Danbury, and right now we're seeing the stage right now, and they're setting up for the debate between Manny Santos and Jahana Hayes. It's starting to fill up there, and I think we're going to see a great turnout out there, and that's where we're going to see them debate, the topics of immigration and everything else that really are important. Yeah. And Election Connection is actually going to be covering live right after we're done here. We're going to be covering the debate in its entirety, so if you stick around, we'll be able to show you that there.
Yeah, and hopefully we can get some good feedback from attendees and see what the candidates have to say, because tonight's going to be a really important night for the candidates, and I think particularly Manny Santos in getting his message out, really kind of managing to paint a picture of himself on a bigger stage.
I think it's going to be important for him, to try and find those votes. Both candidates aren't moderate, really. They're both very end of the spectrum. So I think it's going to be really important, more important for Manny tonight to show a better, have a better stage presence.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of voters who want to get a better idea of how these candidates think about the issues. So we'll see what he talks about. We'll see how they go back and forth. I think one of the interesting things from this particular race is we haven't seen too much going back and forth between the candidates. Yeah. They haven't really been interacting with each other too much, so to see them face to face tonight is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting, to see them talk with each other, regardless of, the vast difference in funding that they both had for, their campaigns and who they aren't reaching out to. So I definitely think, though, it's an uphill battle for Manny Santos.
Yeah, so as far as Manny's concerned, Jahana Hayes, I would say, is definitely a vote for more of the same, considering that Elizabeth Etsy, another Democrat, held this seat, had to step down rather than have to be voted out. She just chose not to run. And if people vote for Jahana, I think they're basically saying we're happy with the way things are going. Manny Santos is a tough one because he's so far in the other direction. I don't know how much broad-based appeal he has.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see how things play out tonight.
Absolutely. Let's take a quick look at the weather with Paul Thoreau.
Hi everyone, good evening. I wish I had better news for you. 2 weeks ago we were talking about temperatures up into the 70s to around 80, even last week. Unfortunately though, we are bypassing summer going right into winter. We're talking about a taste of winter in the upcoming forecast. I'll get to that in just a second. It is also going to be rather windy at times over the next 5 days, which is only going to make it colder than it really is out there. And this weekend, we're talking about a roller coaster weekend in terms of temperatures. Let's go over to the next graphic, the surface map. We have a front across the southeastern United States. This moved through late last evening, giving us some heavy showers and some gusty winds. We saw winds gusting of 35 to 45 miles per hour across the state, ushering in that cooler weather we saw today. But I want to draw your attention to the northern plains. We have another cold front. This is going to be rapidly progressing south and east through the day tomorrow. That's going to move through here tomorrow evening, and we're going to talk about Arctic air for the day on Thursday. And if we look at what's going to happen, the jet stream is going to take a dip towards south, and that's going to allow that Arctic air coming straight from the Arctic to come into our area. Let's check out the forecast for tonight. We're talking about mostly clear skies and cold, lows in the mid-30s in the forecast for tomorrow. On the next slide, we have highs in the mid-50s, but we're going to see clouds increase as that cold front approaches. Cannot rule out a few showers late in the afternoon, and it's really going to turn breezy out there. Gusts upwards of 35 to 40 miles per hour in the forecast for tomorrow night. On the next slide, look at this in there. I put in a little snowflake. Do not be surprised to see a few flakes fly in the air, especially across northwest hills. A look at this low tomorrow night, dipping down below freezing. So if you have any plants outside, you may want to bring those in. And let's check out the next slide, the 5-day forecast. For Thursday, look at this, wind chills in the 30s during the day. Look at this high of 44. We should be forecasting this on Thanksgiving. It is not even Halloween yet. And to start the day, we're going to see wind chills into the lower 20s. But look at this, Friday into Saturday, here's the roller coaster, highs in the mid to upper 50s. But another front comes through Sunday, and we're going to see temperatures only in the mid 40s. Let's bring it back to the desk.
Thanks, Paul. We've got Joseph Oliveri in the field right now. Joe, what are you expecting to hear, really, tonight? I guess from specifically Manny about immigration.
Well, guys, Mr. Santos, former mayor of Meriden, Connecticut, has been pretty consistent in his support of the Trump administration's various policies nationally and those that affect the state. Connecticut is a state that has almost 3,800 DACA recipients, and Mr. Santos has outlined very specifically he wants a path for DACA recipients to legalization, but not to citizenship. Of course, he means that the provisions that DACA has for people who, as he says, entered the country illegally will not be available. Johanna Hayes obviously is countering this in her platform. She says that the Trump administration's approach to immigration is quote-unquote outdated, and so we're obviously going to see some contention around that issue.
Do you think there are going to be any other major talking points tonight other than immigration?
Well, David, you know, jobs is going to be a significant talking point. Manny Santos has been very adamant about his opinions about the minimum wage. The governor's race, for example, that Lamont, the Democratic candidate, wants to, as he says, slowly raise the minimum wage in Connecticut to $15, which Johanna Hayes also supports. Manny Santos, of course, is not agreeing with that position. He wants to keep the minimum wage where it is because he says as a result, like the tax breaks that the Democrats are pushing for this election, that wages are going to result, that higher minimum wages are going to result in higher prices.
Yeah, it sounds like it's getting a little noisy there, so we'll get back to you when it seems to quiet down after. Thanks, Joseph.
Yep, we're seeing a steady stream. And don't forget, for those watching at home, we're going to be live on Election Night, Tuesday, November 6th on WXCI, our university radio station, Comcast Channel 97, and Spectrum TV 192.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's really filling up out there.
Absolutely, yeah. hopefully there's a good crowd.
Mm-hmm.
So another one of the huge issues is going to be healthcare between these two candidates. And Johanna Hayes, an advocate for a single-payer system and Medicare for All, as it's otherwise known, and Manny Santos, who is an advocate for the Trump administration's position of repealing and replacing Obamacare, definitely more of a free market healthcare advocate. So not a lot of overlap on those positions.
Interestingly enough, though, there is a little overlap in healthcare that we see through both of their campaigns with their stances on prescription drug, abuse and trying to maybe perhaps lower prescription drug costs, because I think that's a big thing in our system right now.
Yeah, I would imagine they've got slightly different approaches as to how to solve that issue.
Absolutely.
But one of the things they can definitely agree on is the fact that Connecticut has a massive crisis with addiction, and both of them have said that they want to work on establishing more programs to help addicts and create more avenues for addiction treatment. So we'll see what they have to say about that tonight, if at all.
Yeah, and I mean, Johanna has actually additionally expressed her interest in the woman's right to choose and everything, and really funding systems in place for women that seek abortion. So I think that'll be important for her.
Absolutely, and it's another popular topic this year with the record number of women candidates running for many positions, and abortion topic is definitely one that they can rally around, no matter if they've got different issues or different opinions on other issues. That's one that really seems to solidify a lot of the female voting base.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It used to be such a taboo topic, but now in politics we're seeing it become more of the discussion, not just in the women politicians, but the male politicians as well. We're seeing more on both sides discuss certain avenues and ways to take care of it.
Yep, absolutely. I want to go back a second to their healthcare positions because this year we've seen Democrats pushing the healthcare issue more than ever. Some studies have come out that have shown that current Democrat advertising is almost the huge majority is on the healthcare issue. And, obviously they're fighting back against the fact that Republicans tried to repeal and replace Obamacare. Questionable how popular that position is. And Democrats are definitely seeming to find a lot of ground for advocating for maintaining the current healthcare status, and some are even advocating for going to a single-payer system. So one way or another, it's something they're talking about.
Yeah. Do you think that the main focus of healthcare in the Democratic side is to really pull from the right, or do you think it's more to secure the way that the left feels about the healthcare system?
I think it's pretty strong. It's a strong opinion on the right that we should have a free market healthcare system, and it doesn't really correspond at all with the current Democrat rhetoric. Now the issue is you have a lot of people with pre-existing conditions who definitely want to keep those parts of the ACA, the American Health Care Act, in place, but I don't think that's a particular topic that's going to have a lot of draw from the right. It could have a lot of draw for unaffiliated voters.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be I personally think that healthcare is going to be one of the biggest stepping stones in the conversation tonight between both candidates. Another one in Connecticut, it's such a huge one, just gun control and gun control legislation. I think, Connecticut's got to be the centerpiece of the conversation at this point.
Absolutely, and especially considering the fact that the 5th Congressional District that Johanna Hayes and Manny Santos are running for is home to Newtown, which experienced, of course, one of the most deadly and tragic school shootings in U.S. history. So when you have these candidates talking about that particular issue, it's definitely at the forefront of a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Election Connection.
Pretty exciting night.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to Live Election Connection.
Welcome back to Election Connection. It's Election Connection.
All of the late-breaking poll numbers and the stories as they develop.
It's okay to talk to the other side. It's okay to work with the other side. We haven't had enough of that.
People will say that this has become one of the most personal campaigns and governor races so far in history.
The Republican candidate shot himself in the foot.
I don't know if she's desperate.
Tonight's a very, very important night because the balance of power can shift.
First of all, if they have a child here, it's an anchor baby. That child's an American citizen.
Anchor baby.
Right. Well, that's the legal name for it.
I'd like to call it a baby.
You're not going to like what I'm going to say.
No, it doesn't matter whether I like it. What's going to happen?
Clay Cope, he's a very staunch defender of the Second Amendment.
So tonight I'm going to be giving an overall analysis of the current outlook of the election.
We're going to go to a caller right now.
Your live and local source.
Live Election Connection.
Election Connection.
All right. So getting back to gun control, Johanna, she really supports comprehensive gun reform. Being an educator in Connecticut, I think that really bolstered that opinion, kind of being in the classroom and, really feeling that, the experience through, she wasn't there for Sandy Hook, but, she really wants to improve also the mental health care system that, that's become such a problem that's arisen as almost a side effect, I'd say, from the problems that we're seeing with gun violence.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of those topics, and that's definitely a point for the right. They are advocates for mental health screening and everything like this. But I think one of the biggest things about Hayes is that she's an advocate for an assault weapons ban on the federal level. So that's definitely something that could bring out the NRA members and gun advocates in Connecticut, because they are a very strong voting base.
Absolutely, yeah. So we have Zelina standing by right now. Zelina, can you hear us this time?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. So are you able to hear a lot of conversation in the room right now? Do you have a kind of guess as to what people are kind of expecting to see tonight?
Yes, I hear that people are excited to see the discussion about education and specifically conversations about topics that they both have extremely different views pro-life, education, gun control.
Now, how do you think Johanna's going to come out onto the field with, in terms of education?
I think she's going to come out very strong in that. I feel like because of her background in the education field and having won the national teacher award in 2016 from Barone, I feel like she's going to come in with strong.
Would you mind speaking up a little? It's a little loud in the room with you right now.
Okay, I'm sorry. I feel like she's going to come in very strongly.
We're just going to have to come back to you, Eileen. I'd hate to cut you off, but we're just going to have to come back to you. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
Well, it definitely seems like the debate is popular.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people are showing up tonight.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this year, people are really interested into what happens into these elections, especially this one here with the 5th District.
Yeah, and this is going to be a real clash. Like I said before, it's the distillation of the national conversation to a single district. And you've got Johanna Hayes, who is definitely not a Trump fan, Manny Santos, who certainly is. And it's like everything everybody's talking about across the country happening in one night. We're not talking about a moderate Republican and a moderate Democrat. These are people from the two extremes coming together, and I can imagine it's going to be interesting.
I think we're going to hear a lot of opposites tonight. We're going to hear, okay, healthcare, and we're going to hear just what we're saying here. Both ends of the spectrum. It's really going to be interesting about.
And that's something that maybe defines our time now is you don't have candidates who overlap on a lot of issues. You really have people who are all the way to one side and all the way to the other side, and there's not that many topics where they really cross over. I think one of the places where these two candidates do have some common ground is on veterans care, veterans health care issues, and that's a fairly common one, but
yeah,
it's something. At least they got something.
Yeah, I mean, they both feel like there needs to be an overhaul for the way that we treat our veterans, the benefits that they should be receiving, and the employment opportunities. So, I don't think that's what we'll hear tonight, though. Unfortunately, I think we'll hear more of how they're different. But I mean, in this partisan time, it wouldn't surprise me, hearing from how they're different.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be the case where they really get bogged down in some of these contentious issues. It's going to depend on the structure of the debate and how it's moderated, but we're definitely going to hear some real back and forth, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, yeah, we are. Now, they both definitely have different stances on the economy and what to do in that sense. Johanna, she supports job creation and training programs, especially within the community college programs. Johanna herself going to Naugatuck Valley Community College myself as well, not to plug the school. But she also supports raising the minimum wage here in Connecticut and federally. She sees it as important, to find a living wage in these times where all the prices are inflating.
And that's definitely an interesting one. And I'm curious to know what the support for raising the minimum wage is in Connecticut. It's certainly not something that's going to appeal to people on the other side. Not that she's really in a position of trying to appeal to, right-wing voters. But the issue with raising the minimum wage, without getting into an entire economics discussion, is that often what happens is, due to the increased cost for business owners, they can't afford to hire as many employees, and that business cost gets passed down to the customer in a lot of cases. So. I think for a lot of business people, and Connecticut right now is such a hostile state to businesses. So when people hear about a position like that, that might actually push them in the other direction. Just because it's such a huge issue in the state right now, we've got record numbers of people leaving, and I think it's definitely true that people want a candidate who's going to push the state in a more pro-growth, pro-business direction.
And is that kind of the stance that Manny's taking, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the stance that Manny's taking. It'll be interesting to see, if he does get elected, how much he can do on the state level. But as far as the federal level is concerned, he's definitely going to be an advocate for the Trump administration's policies of lower regulation, lower taxes. He was definitely a fan of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was passed by basically party lines by Republicans. So he holds those positions, and it'll be interesting to see if a lot of people can look past his more conservative stance on a lot of these social issues and for voters to align with him on economic issues.
Do you think this will be one of his stances that he'll be able to maybe pull those unaffiliated votes?
I think it's one of the only things he really has going for him, in my opinion. Because when you look at the district, it's been fairly strongly in favor of tougher gun laws, increased school spending, things like this. But as far as the general idea of fostering a more pro-growth business environment, I think people in this district, that's something that appeals to them.
We've got Stephanie Shaw at the Portuguese Cultural Center. Stephanie, how you doing?
In just a couple of minutes, the debate between Democratic candidate Johanna Hayes and Republican candidate Manny Santos will take place. Both candidates are running for Congress.
Yeah, so what do you think we're going to be hearing from Johanna?
She was a former teacher, so she is very passionate about public school system and gun control.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. We're going to have to wrap it up right there, but thank you very much for being out there for us. Let us know if you got something else.
Thank you. This is Stephanie Shaw, live from the Portuguese Cultural Center. Back to you in the studio.
Yeah, I mean, I really can't stress enough how we're just going to see one or two specific topics just completely, I think, taking up the debate where, they're going to be really gung-ho about how they feel, and two opposite ends of the spectrum. She was mentioning with education. I mean, Johanna, I think, upholds education as like the cornerstone of her campaign right now.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely one of her stronger points. Her experience helps her in that particular field. And Manny Santos, he's definitely not a strong proponent for increased school spending, but he is a proponent for increasing the levels of education and things like that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a live shot of the stage right now. We're over at the Portuguese Cultural Center, and we're waiting for them to take the stage. And we see the reporters sitting there, and we see one of our own, I believe, sitting there on behalf to Mia Graham, and she's going to be asking some questions for them tonight, and for Election Connection tonight. And we're going to be doing this week and over the next 3 weeks, covering the elections. Not just the 5th district, but the House. So we're going to toss right now to the commercial. So we'll be back in a minute.
Election Connection.
Pretty exciting night. Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to Live Election Connection.
Welcome back to Election Connection. It's Election Connection.
All the late-breaking poll numbers and the stories as they develop.
It's okay to talk to the other side. It's okay to work with the other side. We haven't had enough of that.
People will say that this has become one of the most personal campaigns and governor races so far in history.
The Republican candidate has shot himself in the foot.
I don't know if she's desperate.
Tonight's a very, very important night because the balance of power can shift.
First of all, if they have a child here, it's an anchor baby. That child's an American citizen.
Anchor baby.
Right. Well, that's the legal name for it.
I'd like to call it a baby.
You're not going to like what I'm going to say.
No, it doesn't matter whether I like it. What's going to happen?
Clay Cope, he's a very staunch defender of the Second Amendment.
So tonight I'm going to be giving an overall analysis of the current outlook of the election.
We're going to go to a caller right now.
Your live and local source.
Live Election Connection.
Election Connection.
We're covering the 5th District Congressional for Johanna Hayes and Manny Santos. It's something we heard just there on the break with anchor babies. Again, immigration is just such a hot button topic.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's been a massive national issue for years now. Hasn't really changed much. The situation hasn't changed. There hasn't been too many big policy moves or anything like that, except of course now with the Trump administration putting some more restrictions on legal and illegal immigration. The travel ban, of course, has been a huge topic as well. And these are all things Johanna Hayes has strongly criticized, and Manny Santos has strongly advocated for. So it's definitely going to be a huge contrast tonight.
Yeah, and we've got a couple, under a minute for the debate, so I think it's going to be really interesting. So we're just going to be seeing some great stuff. So,
I can imagine that we're not going to see a lot of crossover in these two candidates. This debate is about to start, and I think there's a lot of people in that room that are excited to see what these candidates are going to say and really paint a more clear picture of themselves for voters.
Yeah. And let's take a look at the Portuguese Cultural Center right now to see what's happening between both candidates. All right, so it looks like we see both candidates right now. Yeah, we got Johanna Hayes on the left and Manny on the right, appropriately enough. Yeah, so in just a few seconds or minutes, we'll be hearing from them on all these things that we've been talking about. You know, we'll see if it'll come to fruition, you know, whether or not we'll, you know, how they feel about certain legislation and certain policies.
Absolutely, and they look fairly calm right now. It doesn't look like they're at each other's throats yet, but I would imagine it's not going to take too long for that to happen.
No, and it's interesting that they're sitting down. You know, I was kind of expecting two podiums there for them, a more debate-type feel.
Yep. No, and it's going to be interesting to see what questions the moderators have for them, if they really draw out these contentious topics that we've been talking about, or if they're going to talk about more Connecticut-specific issues.
I don't know. I think they might start with the hardball questions. I really think if they want to get their time's worth out of these two candidates, which again you brought up, we really haven't heard much discussion between them. I think they're really going to want to hear how they differ in their views. So I think they're going to ask them the hard-hitting questions, maybe a softball to open, you know, maybe a localized question. But I think more on a federal scale, they want to see, you know, what they'll be doing if they're elected.
Yeah, and I think we can guarantee that in the introductions, Johanna Hayes is definitely going to highlight her educational background. Manny Santos is going to be highlighting his business background, and they're going to be, they're going to be definitely advocating, you know, what they've got going for them, and Manny Santos definitely going to be talking about his former experience as mayor of Meriden, and really just highlighting his experience and what he's got going for him.
Yeah, I feel like that's something we didn't talk about. Do you think maybe his political background could maybe get a few more votes, or is getting him the votes that he needs?
Well, it doesn't seem to be helping him at the moment. Johanna Hayes definitely has the lead. The political experience, I'm sure, you know, gives him some
edge.
Yeah, some sort of edge. But you know, he lost his bid for re-election for mayor in Meriden for his second term, and then he lost his bid for election to the city council. So, you know, maybe he's learned something from that.
Absolutely.
He's definitely talked about the fact that he knows politics is a hardball game and very cutthroat. So he's got an understanding of the process, but it just seems like he's going to have to do a lot to win the support of unaffiliated voters in this district. And I think we talked about the fact that unaffiliated voters are the vast majority of voters in this district. So he's got to find some way to give himself broad-based appeal.
Yeah, and I just think, I think the voters don't really care as much as they have in the past in terms of a candidate having a political background, as much as it does help. You know, it does show that they have a pedigree towards politics and how to, you know, really help out the people. I think the people, you know, especially with, you know, Trump rising to presidential power, I think they really care more about what they say and what they're going to promise.
Yep, it's definitely a trend nowadays that people don't necessarily have to have political experience to go into the field. And of course, you mentioned Trump. That's you know, example number one. But in this situation, Johanna Hayes, school teacher, definitely has experience with public policies and their effects, everything else like that, but no actual political experience. So she's coming into this as a newcomer and definitely having a strong reception at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, she's had a great reception, and yeah, I think that she's gonna get it. I mean, it's looking again like it's poised for her. Manny's got a lot of work out for him, but you know, she's really pulling all the votes. You know, it's more of, you know, what the people want to see in the Democratic candidate right now, and you know, with everything that they want.
And that's the fact, is this district has leaned Democrat for a while. It's gone back and forth a few times with Elizabeth Etsy, of course, multiple terms, only stepping down because of that scandal. Otherwise, she may well still be in the seat running as an incumbent. So I think the candidates are actually about to get going.
Yeah, it does look like the moderator's up to the podium. So it seems like they're about to start.
Could I ask everybody to take their seats, please?
seems like they're trying to get the crowd going.
Good evening and welcome. I would like to acknowledge and thank those responsible for our being able to listen to this debate tonight. First, a big thank you to the Portuguese Cultural Center, which has provided us with a space so well suited for the evening. They have accommodated all of our questions and requests in a welcoming and accommodating manner. Thank you to the members of Professor Barone's Media and Communications class at Western Connecticut State University for sharing their time and expertise so that we have a sound system this evening and live streaming to the campus itself. Thank you to the members. Thank you to all the members of the League of Women Voters of Northern Fairfield County and the League of Women Voters of Litchfield County for the various roles they have taken tonight. To appropriately thank the next participants and contributors for this evening's debate, let me begin with a quote from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to a friend in Virginia in 1787, the same year the Constitution was written. The basis of our governments being the opinion of the people, the very first object should be to keep that right. And were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. But I should mean that every man should receive those papers and be capable of reading them. Jefferson made it clear that he believes a sound democracy rests on having well-informed, literate citizens. This is the mission of the League of Women Voters as well. We have on the stage 4 reporters fulfilling the role that Jefferson believed was so essential to our democracy. I will introduce them in the order chosen by lot in which they will question the candidates. And I would do that if I had the numbers. Did I give you the numbers? Well, my apologies. The numbers got lost. Jillian Morrow is here from WLAD, and she's the news director at WLAD. Rob Reiser is here from the News Times. He is a staff writer for the News Times. John Moquette is here from the Newtown Bee. He is associate editor and president of the New England Newspaper and Press Association. And finally, Tamia Graham, who is a student in the Media and Communications program at Western Connecticut State University. Thank you to the audience, to you, the audience, for your interest and attention to what the candidates want to tell you. And finally, we are grateful that Marianne Pollock agreed to serve as our moderator. Marianne is a resident of Stamford and a member of the local League of Women Voters there. She has served on administrative boards for the League of Women Voters at all levels, local, state, and national, as well as those of many nonprofits as well. She has moderated many League of Women Voter debates, including the 5th Congressional District debate here in 2016. Now, a few words about procedures and expectations. All audience questions to the candidates must be in written form. League members will be walking throughout the room with note cards and pencils. Please raise your hand to get a card and pencil, or have your card and pencil collected with a written question on it. A team of League of Women Voter members will screen the questions for duplication and appropriateness. All questions must be addressed to both candidates and not be personal in nature. Questions must relate to policy issues. And finally, the Western Connecticut State University media team here this evening has requested that there be no live streaming of the debate from anyone's cell phone. They say it will conflict with their sound system. And also, please make sure that all your phones are set not to ring. Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Marianne. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the sound sufficient? Are you all hearing clearly enough? Is that a yes or no with the hands? Okay. Thank you very much. If there are any issues of sound, please let us know. Good evening, everyone. Before this evening debates begin, there are some procedural details to share, and there are several requests that I would like to make. Just to review the format for the evening. A drawing has been conducted to determine the order of the questions. The first round of questions will be from our 4 representatives of the media, and the second round of questions will be from the League of Women Voters and from you, the audience. A drawing has been conducted to determine the order of those questions and the order of the candidate's response. I will address the question to the first candidate, who will have 90 seconds to respond. The same question will then be addressed to the second candidate, who will also have 90 seconds to answer. If desired, each candidate may take an additional 30 seconds to rebut. Following the responses, I will move to the second question addressed to the second candidate. Each candidate has an assigned team of LWV timers who will give them a sense of the time, 30 seconds, etc. They'll hold up a stop sign when it's there. There is Ms. Santos' set of timers, and Mr. Santos is on the left, and Ms. Hayes here is on the right. Thank you for that. Now, we ask that there be no applause or no expressions of approval or disapproval at all during the event. Not only does it take away from the valuable time we have this evening for the debate, but it is also very distracting to the candidates. We know that you have enthusiasm for democracy, and we applaud that. And we will allow all the applause in the world at the end. But please, during the debate, do not express your approval or disapproval, and we really, really appreciate that. It is very important. Again, please turn off your cell phones. The ringing is distracting, and it is also a problem with the sound system. Now to the candidates in the debates. We'll begin first with the media question, and our first question is from Mr. Voket from the Newtown Bee.
Thank you. First of all, on behalf of my colleagues, we'd like to thank the League for hosting this forum and including local members of the media on the panel. To the candidates, I'd like you to each please review your position on proposed federal common sense firearms legislation, specifically regarding universal background checks on all gun sales, the reduction of legal magazine capacity, and new laws to address illegal trafficking of firearms that already have such overwhelming support of the American people, including millions of.
Ms. Hayes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This question's an easy one for me because I think that, like you said, so many Americans already agree that common sense gun reform is necessary. Connecticut has some of the most comprehensive gun laws that I believe need to be duplicated around the country. I know that there is a challenge to that argument, which starts with we have to protect our Second Amendment rights. I'm a history teacher and a lover of the Constitution, and I value our individual rights. But I also understand that collectively, our communities are not safer when guns are on the streets. My husband is a police officer. We have guns in our home. Just like my husband had to go through a background check and is expected to be a responsible gun owner, I expect everyone else to do the same thing. There are loopholes at gun shows that allow for dangerous weapons to be released on our streets, and our communities are not safe. Our children are not safe. It is unreasonable to expect that we need high-powered rifles in our communities. I would absolutely support any type of reform that says we are keeping our community safe and allowing responsible, law-abiding gun owners to own guns if they choose.
Thank you. Mr. Santos.
There's few things more important in our Constitution than individual liberties and individual rights. The legislation that's being proposed federally would really be an affront on that. Now, there's no doubt that there is a problem with gun violence and gun shooting in our schools. But the far majority, and I challenge you, all of them, none of them were done by law-abiding citizens. They either had issues in their history, law-abiding issues, in other words, criminal. They had these weapons illegally, or they had mental problems, emotional instability in their family. That is what needs to be addressed. It is unreasonable, I believe, to turn law-abiding citizens who by far do not break the law, to turn them into criminals with aggressive gun control legislation. What we got to remember is that the far majority of these shootings are not done by responsible gun owners.
Any rebuttal, Ms. Hayes?
Yes, absolutely. And I say this to Mr. Boquet. I just want to remind the audience that Adam Lanza was a law-abiding citizen until he killed his mother and 26 children. So this idea that we wait for people to commit a crime before they go on our radar is outrageous. We need to have comprehensive mental health reform, comprehensive gun reform, so that we can make sure before these actions take place and we're being reactionary, that we've done as much as we can to prevent these things from happening.
Thank you. Mr. Santos, any rebuttal?
Sure. If we don't uphold the Second Amendment, we have to be careful about our infringing the Second Amendment. What other amendment will we start infringing? Maybe the Fourth Amendment. Maybe the First Amendment, the right to assemble. Will that be infringed upon too because of disorderly conduct? We have to be careful about what we do. And the far majority of violence that does occur, especially in our cities, are done by illegals, illegal guns, not not law-abiding citizens with that have the authority or the permission from the government.
Thank you. Our second question will be from Ms. Graham, who's from the Western Connecticut State University Media Communications Department. Ms. Graham. And you'll address your question first to Mr. Santos.
So state colleges and universities are discussing how to make education more affordable, such as offering tuition free, a tuition flat rate, free tuition with established criteria, tuition rebates, or a station-wide promise program. If elected to Congress, how do you plan to work for more affordable college expenses in our country and lower student debt?
Student debt is a bit out of control. One thing that we have to remember is that these are debts that occurred by individuals of their own choosing. They wanted to attend a college or a school that they may not have been able to afford. When you go to college, you have to have the expectations that you're going to pay back that debt. And that's done with a job, with a career, a meaningful career. There are ways to reduce the cost. One of the things that we could incentivize that graduates that go into certain fields can have financial support, can have some loans either forgiven or paid for, because there are fields out there that we do need more expertise on. So I wouldn't be opposed to doing things of that nature. But ultimately, when you go to college, you have to be responsible enough to pay back that debt and not expect the taxpayers and other individuals to pay it for you.
Ms. Hayes.
Thank you for that question. I think that we are a country that educates our children, and the idea that people should not be able to access federal funds in order to go to college is ridiculous. If you look at what we spend on federal grants and loans and that allow young people to go to school or people to return to school, it only improves our economy. What would I do? Look at incentives for students who return to the state and live here and work here, because it only adds to our economy. Look at the cost of higher education, because much of the overhead and the outrageous and rising costs that it costs for young people to go to school is not in line with the economy and the jobs that are out there. Also, if you look at what was spent on the federal Pell Grant program, we spent about $26 billion, the same amount or roughly the same amount that is proposed for this wall that Mexico was supposed to pay for. So if we prioritize and decide what is important to us as a nation, educating our children or keeping people out, we can find the money to make sure that more children go to college, that more young people graduate ready and prepared for the changing workforce and the economy. And then finally, look at programs in schools and make sure that we are not graduating young people who will not be able to find gainful employment. Make sure that our curriculums at our universities match the needs of the changing economy.
Do you have any rebuttal?
Yeah, having access to federal funding for loans, and I think that makes sense, and I wouldn't be opposed to continuing those programs. But ultimately, many of them are loans, and they should be paid back.
All right. Our third question will be from Ms. Morrow from WLAD, and you will address it to Ms. Hayes.
After derailments on Metro North, sleep apnea testing for conductors was mandated, but was then repealed in 2017. Should it be required again, and what can Congress do to motivate railroads to meet positive train control technology installation deadlines?
I think absolutely it should be required. If you look at, we talk about regulations and requirements as if they're a bad thing, but the way these things come about is the need for safety and security and improved outcomes in our community. When we talk about our rail lines, especially in the state of Connecticut, we have a lot of work to do. Our infrastructure is failing. It's not safe. I was looking, and our Ways and Means Committee in the last 8 years has met over 400 times and had one witness that spoke for 5 minutes. The Republican-controlled Ways and Means Committee. We're not really interested in improving our infrastructure if we're not even willing to have dialogue or have safety meetings or committee meetings to say, what does that look like and how do we begin to approve it? We can't just leave things exactly the way they are when we're seeing time and time again where trains are derailing, where people are being killed, where communities are put in danger. We have to make sure that not only do we keep up with our failing infrastructure, but rebuild it, look at research, development, safety, controls, everything, so that we are making sure that the people who ride our trains, who travel within our state and throughout this country, are safe and protected.
Mr. Santos?
I think we should be able to do anything or as much as possible to make sure that our transportation system is safe, including I would be supportive of that, of requiring conductors to make sure that they don't have sleep deprivation. Absolutely. I'm very much in favor of public transportation. Our rail system is it needs a lot of work, and it needs a lot of funding. Right here in the state of Connecticut, as just an example, just recently the completion of the New Haven, Hartford, Springfield line. It cost millions of dollars. More money should have been actually allocated for that very thing instead of the busway. I mean, that was a lot of money that most people don't use now.
Any further comments?
No.
We'll go to our last question from the media, from Mr. Reiser of the News Times.
Thanks very much.
And you will address it to Mr. Santos, please.
The question is about illegal immigration, slightly different question for Mr. Santos than for Mrs. Hayes. Manny, you call yourself a law and order candidate, and you agree with the Trump administration's hard line on illegal immigration, including spending billions in taxpayer money to build a border wall, separating minors from adults at the border, and ending the program known as DACA. How do you respond to criticism that these measures go beyond the requirements of law and order and are cruel and un-American?
Well, I made it clear in my from the very first, when I first announced my candidacy, that individuals that were brought here under the DACA program as young children do deserve a clear path, a rigorous path to legalization, but not citizenship. And as far as everything else that's going on at the border, look, we have an illegal immigration problem. We need to solve it. And how do we solve this? We have to enforce our laws that we have in place. For far too long, for a number of administrations and Congresses, we've simply ignored it or been very lax on enforcement. And now we have a system that's strained because it's overburdened, it's overwhelmed by the number of illegals that we are now trying to process. And these folks that are being separated, their families are being separated, more resources as of recently have been allocated, more judges in order to hear these cases. But there are a lot of people waiting, a lot of families waiting for this process. So naturally, there's going to be problems. But this is because the federal government in the past has failed. And now it's finally being enforced. And it's not being enforced perfectly, but finally our laws are being enforced.
Ms. Hayes.
A slightly
I'm sorry, you're directing separate questions? All right, then we'll give them each a chance to rebut the question. Let's rebut that question if you'd like, and then we'll go to you.
Rebut it or answer it?
Just answer it, please. I'm sorry, thank you. Just comment in any.
We have an immigration problem in this country. I would beg to differ that it's an illegal immigration problem. But we are a country built on immigrants. We are a country where people have found their ways here, where families have built a lifestyle here. Most of the people who come to our border are coming seeking asylum, which is very different than illegal immigrants. When we talk about DACA, these young children were brought here through no fault of their own and have become contributing members of society. We have a responsibility as a country to provide multiple pathways to citizenship that allows them to enjoy the benefits of this country, just like generations of people before them.
Any further comments, Mr. Santos? Please, ladies and gentlemen, we've asked you most courteously, and we really, really mean it. Do not applaud, please. Thank you.
Again, there are clear paths to citizenship. There are clear paths to refugee status. We got to follow those.
Thank you.
Just for Mrs. Hayes, you say that America has always been a country that has welcomed immigrants, and that as a practical matter, providing more ways for people to become citizens will help the economy grow. But how is it fair for immigrants who went through the legal process, and how is it fair to struggling families to divert American tax money to help those who break the law and don't follow the rules?
We need to work on our failing immigration system so that there are multiple pathways, robust pathways to citizenship. We have a system by which people are sponsored by a family member and take decades sometimes for their petitions to be heard. We have work to do. We need to go back and do that. But to say all of a sudden that we are a country that closes our borders, we have people here who come to our borders once again seeking asylum. To separate parents from children. To operate in an inhumane way does not align with our values as a country and does not keep our borders safer. We can deal with our immigration problem and the challenges at our border in a way that is humane and reflective of who we are as Americans. And to say that by doing that, it's not fair to people who came here legally, there should be multiple pathways. Because not everybody comes here for the same reasons or for the same opportunities or under the same stressors or duress. So to say that there's only one way to enter this country is antiquated, does not align with anything else we do as a nation, and really needs to be improved upon.
Thank you. Mr. Santos, do you have any comments?
My opponent is embracing making illegal immigrants, making undocumented individuals here in this country citizens, voting citizens. Why would anyone want this? If you come to this country like I did, do it legally. Like a lot of people do it legally. If you come from a country that has political prosecution, genocide, then there's a path, a clear path to seek asylum.
Thank you. We'll move now to the next set of questions. Thank you, media. We'll move on to other questions. We have a question now on transit. How will you improve service for Metro North Danbury and Waterbury lines and Hartford Transit Danbury Brewster shuttle buses? So again, transit lines and shuttle buses, what kind of improvements? And we'll begin with Ms. Hayes.
Actually, that's not my question. Right, Mr. Reiser asked me the last question.
I beg your pardon?
Mr. Reiser asked me the last question.
Oh, you didn't comment on it.
No.
Did you want to comment on that?
No.
All right. So I'm sorry. I thought you're saying you're next?
No, I'm not next.
Okay. Well, all right. According to my chart. Then let's start again. We'll start with all right, Mr. Santos, we'll let you begin on this transit question. Would you mind starting with that question on transit?
The question sounds like more applicable to a state office and not so much federal, but certainly from the federal funding and assistance, especially the assistance with railway. I'd be very supportive in trying to beef that up. We have to free up the traffic that occurs in our highways. One of the ways to do that, and one of probably the most effective ways, is to expand our rail system. I'd like to see more affordability in our rail transportation system. Being able to perhaps be able to afford a commute, a daily commute, and then have easy access either by shuttle or public busing to your place of work. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. So hopefully we could get that done.
Thank you. Ms. Hayes.
Thank you. I actually disagree. I don't think that is a burden that should be put on Connecticut taxpayers. I think that we send more money to Washington than most other states and get back less. So if the people in the state of Connecticut ask for help to rebuild our infrastructure, we should be able to get it. As a representative, I would fight to bring dollars back to the state so that we can make sure we are addressing the problems with our infrastructure, so that our cities can thrive, so that commuters can get to work and work in surrounding areas, so that we connect different parts of the state and our downtowns become robust communities. I don't think that the conversation about how we pay for this and what this looks like rests solely on Connecticut taxpayers. Once again, the federal government has assisted in other states to rebuild their infrastructure, and I don't think it's unreasonable for us to ask just for what we're sending, to get back dollar for dollar what we're sending to the federal government so that we can use that money to rebuild the infrastructure of the state, which includes our rail lines, the Danbury-Waterbury line. Meriden has a beautiful new transit station that has a train that runs to Hartford. That should go all through the state. The bus line, many of our millennials and Generation X young people, they don't drive. They don't want to drive. They commute. They want to get around quickly. They want to live and work in this state, and we have to make sure that that opportunity is available for them.
Mr. Santos?
I'm not sure what part Mrs. Hayes disagrees with me on. I actually agree with all of that. If the part that I want to make clear is that this should be a state decision. If the state wants to expand its rail system, the federal government can help do that, but that should be driven by the state.
Any further rebuttal?
That's the part I disagree with. That is actually not a state burden or state decision, that we have a responsibility to do that.
Right. The next question then is on trade, and we'll begin with Ms. Hayes. Trade has been a polarizing factor for many voters from both parties. Will you support trade policies such as the recently renegotiated NAFTA, North American trade between Canada, Mexico, and the U.S.? If they protect American jobs, raise labor standards, and offer strong environmental protections. Ms. Hayes.
So I think the last part of what you said is the most important part. If they protect American jobs, raise standards, and protect the environment. But when that does not happen, I will not support that. Generally, when these agreements are negotiated, there are provisions that protect the workers as well. It is not just simply about the bottom line or dollars and cents. And we are seeing increasingly that policies are driven based solely on the economy and forgetting what they do to people, what they do to the environment, what they do to communities. We cannot operate and continue to operate with that frame of thinking. The other thing is we cannot continue to alienate our allies in the name of trade and tear down relationships that it has taken decades to build and make enemies of our friends in the name of trade. So if we have, the way I understood your question, it was one way, and then at the end you said if it protects jobs, the environment, I will support trade or provisions that do those things, but anything that does not, I would be opposed to.
Mr. Santos, your thoughts on the question?
I'm very much in favor of trade agreements that protect American jobs and allow businesses to expand on it. As a matter of fact, as far as the NAFTA goes, I'm a casualty of the NAFTA. I lost my job because of it. And I'm glad to see that it's been renegotiated, and in its place is the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement. And it's because the NAFTA was not favorable towards American workers. There's a lot of things that are going on currently with the renegotiation and the tariffs, but we have to push back, and that's what this administration is doing, and with the support of the Republican Congress, is to push back and make sure that Americans do get a better deal on a lot of these trade agreements that have been put in place for many years. We don't need to do it in any way to alienate our allies, but we have to go in there with the understanding that these negotiations on the United States side have the interest of workers right here in the United States.
Thank you. Any further comments?
All of these agreements are not exclusively beneficial to workers in the United States. When we look at what's happening right now with soybean farmers, if we look at the automobile industry, if we look at some of the aerospace industry, healthcare, all of these industries have been adversely affected. So to keep adversely affected, so to have this idea, we'll wait and it'll balance itself out, is unreasonable. We are in a zero-sum game that is dangerous and making decisions that our children are going to have to pay for moving forward.
Any further comments, Mr. Santos?
Some of these negotiations are tough, and you got to go in there with the idea that you're going to come out there, you're going to come out with a better agreement. And it doesn't always go smooth in the beginning, and not all of those industries are hurting. As a matter of fact, due to this renegotiated agreement, the dairy industry now has better access, more access to the Canadian market. So it's of great benefit to renegotiate any agreement that we believe was not properly negotiated in the past.
Thank you. Our next question, and we'll begin with Mr. Santos. What is your position on Medicare for all and single payer health care? Thank you.
Medicare for all is essentially government health care. And we have that government health care in many other countries, and it's not the utopia that many are believing that it will be. Single payer is also government. We got to be careful with how much involvement we want in government. First of all, there's no way that we're going to be able to afford it. There's estimates out there in the neighborhood of 36 or 32 to 34 trillion dollar cost. I'm not sure the taxpayers will be able to absorb that. And there aren't going to be any efficiencies to go along with this, because in government, it is very difficult to make things efficient, as we all know this. But what we do need to do is look at the Affordable Care Act and other legislations that can address some of the problems we are currently having with our healthcare system, such as affordability and access. But it would be a dangerous road to go down if we decide that Medicare for all under government control is the answer. I don't think it is.
Ms. Hayes.
I think we absolutely have to work towards a system that will ensure Medicare for all in this country. This idea that it's too expensive, that it's too difficult, that it's too costly, that we can't do anything is outrageous. A healthy population is a strong population. You know, I would never want to go back to prior to the Affordable Care Act, because I know that 160,000 more people in this state were insured, that our rate of uninsured and underinsured dropped to below 6%. And our marketplace was one that actually worked. We have to have more competition. We have to reduce the costs and make it more affordable. But I think that's what Medicare for all would do. The administrative costs are much lower than private insurance. 80% of the money has to go to care. Preventative care is also available, which also drives down the cost. Women have access to more screenings. When we look at what we had prior to the introduction of the Affordable Care Act, Connecticut is so much better off. We look at other countries around the world and people say, well, it's not working as well as it should there. When you look at the price that we spend per person on health insurance, we have one of the highest health insurance of any other industrialized nation in the world. So whatever they're doing, something about it is working better than what we're doing here. But just the idea that this is America. It is the most industrialized nation in the world. People should not have to worry about losing their homes, losing everything they have, going bankrupt as the result of a health-related incident.
Any further comments on that?
Medicare for all will become government health care, and that will be a rationing scheme. That's the only way that this will work. This is the only way that other countries do it, and most other countries actually have multi-tier. So you'll have people on government health care, and you'll have people being able to buy private health care. I don't know how equal that is. It's a dangerous road to go down to.
I'll tell you what a dangerous road is. If you've listened to, in recent days, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Larry Kudlow, who have talked about eliminating Medicare and Social Security to pay for to close the gap that was created by this Republican tax plan that was supposed to pay for itself. So if we're talking about dangerous roads that we're going down, that's a dangerous road, because that would eliminate care altogether for people who rely solely on these policies.
Thank you. Just to extend this conversation on health care, our next question, which we'll begin with Ms. Hayes, is recent surveys show that health care is the #1 concern of many Americans. So let's talk about the policies to ensure that citizens will be able to have affordable health care and access for pre-existing conditions. Can you talk further about what policies to ensure the affordable health care and thoughts about pre-existing conditions? And we'll begin with Ms.
I think that was probably one of the best things that came out of the Affordable Care Act was this idea that we had preventative screening and that people could not be denied because of pre-existing conditions. Because when we think about that, a person who is a diabetic or who has asthma can be denied health care because of a pre-existing condition. Most of the money that is spent is because people with illnesses, it gets so far gone that by the time they do actually see a medical professional, they're already in crisis. You know, I look at things like the ability of young children to stay on their parents' health insurance, for women to get screenings. These were all some really positive things that came out of the Affordable Care Act. But I do recognize that this was passed with some issues, you know, the affordability of it, the competition. But when it was first passed, there were two versions, the Senate version and the House version. It was understood that it still needed work, that we still had to look at it and see, okay, what works, what doesn't work, how do we get back to the table? So this idea that because I did not author it, I do not support it is outrageous, because people in our communities are suffering when no progress is made. I'm not saying to keep everything about any one of these plans. I'm saying that good ideas come from everyone. And this idea that because this healthcare plan or the idea was authored under President Obama, that we don't want any part of it, ignores the fact that we can't deny that people got insurance, that people were made healthier. It doesn't matter where that came from, and we have to make sure that we continue to get more people insured and more people healthy.
Mr. Santos.
I just have to clarify a few things. First of all, the number of additional people that are insured under so-called under the Affordable Care Act is not accurate. The vast majority of people that were not insured that are now insured is due to the expansion of the Medicaid program, which could have been done even without the Affordable Care Act. I need to challenge Mrs. Hayes on the assertion that Republicans in Congress said that they want to eliminate Social Security and Medicare. I've never heard of that. It's preposterous. So I'd like to see at some point where that came from. The Affordable Care Act, there are certain things that are good, as was pointed out already. The being able to get insurance with pre-existing conditions. I think that's an excellent idea. But two major things did not happen with the Affordable Care Act. We were not able to keep our doctors if we wanted to, and the costs did not come down. In fact, they skyrocketed. So those two things need to be addressed, and if the Affordable Care Act is not able to get repealed, should I be fortunate enough to get in there, then a serious and robust reform of that legislation needs to occur.
Ms. Hayes?
I'd be happy to share several articles with you after this debate where
Wonderful.
all of those people, in fact, did say that this is what the plan is to begin to address some of the issues with the looming deficit. But just for a point of clarification, this idea that people were not able to keep their doctors under the Affordable Care Act, what this act did was it set minimum standards for insurance coverage so that people could not sell garbage policies. So doctors had to meet a minimum standard in order to be covered under this policy. Didn't mean you couldn't keep your doctor, just meant that your doctor had to do their part and could not just outrageously bill for visits that should not have been even had or should not be covered.
Thank you. Mr. Santos, any further comment?
Doctors pulled out of the exchange because carriers pulled out of the exchange. In Connecticut, we started with, I believe, four carriers. We are down now to 2. It has not been successful in this state. It's been more successful than many other states, but 2 carriers under the exchange is not competition, which was the intent of it in the first place. The Affordable Care Act, again, had good intentions. The problem is we passed it not understanding what was in it, and we went years trying to fix it, and it's still not fixed well enough.
I'll do one more round of rebuttals if you'd like.
Please. We start with the argument that 2 carriers is not enough, but then want to move to no carriers. The idea is that we get back to the table and make sure that we have more people insured than we have now, that more people have access to affordable, high-quality health care, not less. Repealing it will not be a means to that end. We have to make sure that we are working towards a system where in this country, Americans are healthy and don't have to worry about going bankrupt because of an illness.
Thank you. Mr. Santos.
I absolutely agree with that last part. We do need to address and make sure that individuals and families do not go bankrupt. But the exchanges have not been successful. It has impacted our private insurance. Our insurance premiums are off the charts. Many of us cannot afford it. Many of us were not able to keep the doctors we had. It was a farce. It was sold under false pretense, and now we have to live with the consequences. Not if it gets repealed or overhauled.
Thank you. The next question, and we'll begin with Mr. Santos, is on climate. Where does climate change rank on your list of priorities for national legislation? Mr. Santos.
In my view, there is some changes going on. I'm not convinced that it's all human created. What we got to understand is that at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we balance our environment with our ability to seek a life in which we can support ourselves and our family. Nobody wants dirty water. Nobody wants to breathe polluted air. Nobody wants to live on dirty soil. The idea that we just eliminate all environmental protections is crazy, and no one is advocating that. But in some instances, there is room to have a balance where it's not overburdened on businesses and on individuals.
Ms. Santos.
Ms. Hayes.
I'm sorry?
Ms. Hayes.
I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. Ladies and gentlemen, it is wonderful that you are all here this evening, and we applaud that tremendously. We, the organization, the League of Women Voters, is a nonpartisan organization. We believe and so earnestly want lots of free exchange and debate on issues, and we want everyone here to have the opportunity to hear them and to make your own judgments. So please, if you could keep your comments just as quiet as possible, please, so then I won't be making a mistake and calling someone a name. See how I blamed it on you? Okay. Thank you.
Well, first of all, yes. First of all, I accept the science that says that climate change is real and that man is a large contributor to the problems in our climate. And I also would like to say, I'm not willing to trade a thriving economy for my child's future, for clean air and water. I work in a district where I have kids who are not coming to school because they have asthma-related instances and are admitted to the hospital because they cannot breathe. It's not okay that a factory or a community is profiting when my kids can't breathe. If I go to Congress, I will make sure that the agency that is meant to protect our environment remains intact and is not defunded. We have an administration right now that is doing nothing to abate it, that is putting profits over people, that is rolling back regulations that have put in place to protect our communities. In Connecticut, our natural resources are our greatest gift, our greatest asset, our greatest resource. We have many manufacturing communities who are living with the problems that occurred because there were no regulations and these factories were not remediated and we don't know what is in the ground and the communities are suffering as a result. So this idea that we can keep taking from the environment, raping our air and our water and our community with no recourse and we'll worry about it later is mortgaging our children's future. I am not willing to do that. So where does this stand on my priority list? Right at the top.
Any rebuttal?
Yeah, right here in our own district, in the 5th Congressional District, we have a number of farmers, and they are having a hard time staying in business. You know why they're having a hard time? Because of the environmental regulations that have become unbearable, that they cannot afford to comply with. So maybe some of those regulations do need to be looked at, scaled back, so that it makes sense. There's nothing wrong with doing that.
Ms. Hayes, any further comments?
I think it'll be a much bigger problem for our farmers if there is no environment for them to rely on. If they cannot make a living, we can find a balance where our community benefits and is safe and is not robbed, and businesses can still make money. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but this idea that the only thing we care about is the bottom line and businesses making money, what about the people in our community, which is really what government is supposed to be about?
Thank you. The next question, and we'll begin with Ms. Hayes. What would be your first priority in protecting and promoting women's rights in the United States?
Well, I think the idea that more women will enter this 116th Congress is a first step to protecting and promoting women's rights. I think that our priorities are determined by who is in the room, and right now we see that it's not important. And when it is important and it is challenged, there is no one to stand up for us. So I would protect the rights that women have already litigated. You know, 1973, we already litigated the right for women to make choices, medical choices over their bodies, for women to make healthcare decisions. We've already litigated those things. And I would fight to make sure that we are not rolling back and taking those things away from women. So I would work with other legislators, other congresswomen and men to help them understand that, you know, just like men don't have to have someone make decisions over their bodies, women should not be expected to do the same.
Mr. Santos?
I'm very much in favor of having equal rights. I mean, that's what this country was built on. It would be crazy to have an idea of that women have more rights than men, or men have more rights than women. Yeah, I have women in my family. I have a mother. I have a daughter. Do you think I'm going to pass legislation that will put them at risk or their rights any less than a male? No, absolutely not. So there's this whole question that has to do mainly with abortion, and abortion is a big issue, and it's an issue that is very personal for a lot of people, in particular women. But that's what this is really about. This question has to do with abortion. I'm not in favor of abortion, but it's the law of the land. So,
any further comments? All right, we'll move to the next question.
For me? I'll make a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said no.
No, I'll make a comment. It's just very interesting. We talk a lot about women's rights and the opportunity for women to make choices, and my opponent and many in the Republican Party talk so much about being pro-life. I would argue that they're pro-birth, because if you're pro-life, then you would have problems with putting children in cages and separating people at the border and many of the other positions on other things. So it can't just be we only respect life at conception until you're born, and then when you're born we don't care about you and we'll give you dirty air and water to breathe. So I would argue that if you are pro-life, you are throughout a person's entire life.
Any further comments? Ladies and gentlemen, please. Thank you. Any further comments?
No.
Begin, Mr. Santos, the next question. How would you protect marginalized groups? The current administration continues to roll back protections, for example, for at-risk students. What are your views on these actions, and how would you protect other marginalized groups?
What students?
At-risk students. Do you have a definition for at-risk students? Sorry? We'll get a definition so that we're all saying the same thing. Special needs.
And trans students. Yeah, transgender.
Transgender and special needs and other marginalized groups. Do you have any thoughts about rolling back protections and things? So the current administration has been rolling those back. Do you have any thoughts on how marginalized groups, whatever they may be, and there are certainly many in our society, how would you think about protecting them? And what priority would you give that?
Look, it's I believe that there's two sexes, a man and a woman. And if you're in school, use one or the other. There are states that have done things differently, and that's up to the individual states if they choose to do that. But if we keep dividing people the way we have been, then that becomes a problem, because then everyone is different and we can't come together under one country if we keep identifying our differences.
Ms. Santos?
Ms. Hayes.
Ms. Hayes?
I completely disagree with everything about that. I am an educator, have worked in a building. People are different, but there's nothing wrong with being different. You know, this idea that everybody is exactly the same is not who we are as Americans. It is not what makes this country perfectly imperfect and beautiful. We have a responsibility. Elected officials, community members have a responsibility to treat all people with respect, to make sure that our LGBTQ community is protected, that children with special needs don't have to worry about the Americans with Disabilities Act being rolled back, or civil rights legislation that we've already fought for and litigated being ripped away. You know, no one group is more important than the other, and the Constitution is supposed to protect all people. So when we start saying we don't see people in different groups, and some groups need more than others, and we have a responsibility to make sure that people get exactly what they need. You know, there are differences, whether it be race, ethnicity, gender, that make people diverse. Doesn't mean it's bad or wrong, it's just different. And people can operate in the same space and be different. It happens every day in schools. It happens every day in our communities. It is only those people who pinpoint those differences and demonize them that have a problem. You know, this idea, I see so many people who are victimized and forced to live in the shadows because they feel that they live in communities or under a government that does not protect them. We have to have a government that recognizes that all people have value and makes sure and criminalizes it when someone attacks someone because of the group they belong to.
Thank you. Mr. Santos.
The other part of your question dealt with more so special students with disabilities or special needs. I mean, we could definitely continue, and I would be very supportive of legislation that would give them the ability to continue to do that, to continue to integrate with the community. And I mean, most people would definitely agree with something like that. There's no reason to marginalize individuals that way.
Any further comment?
Yes, you would think that most people would agree with that, but the current Secretary of Education, there's a bill right now that is being reintroduced to roll back those protections for students with disabilities who have individualized education plans, who need supports, to remove and reduce the number of paraprofessional support services, therapists that are in the schools, so that kids receive the services that they need in order to have increased and improved academic outcomes. So while all of that seems outrageous, and you would think that a reasonable person would say, let's give children what they need, there is a proposal right now out of this administration that is trying to do just the opposite.
Thank you. Ms. Hayes, what do you feel you could do in Congress to promote a more bipartisan Congress that works for the American people?
Do what I do every day in my community. treat people with civility and respect, you know, operate in a way that is humane and just and recognizes that people are affected by policies. One of the things that I bring to this atmosphere and this environment is 15 years as a classroom teacher, as a school administrator, as a community organizer, activist, where you don't pick and choose who you advocate for. You do the right thing just because it's the right thing to do. So this partisanship only hurts people in our communities. And one of the things I think about is when we're having a conversation about healthcare, I'm thinking about the kid who is in the hospital because he couldn't go to a dentist for 4 months. When we're having a conversation about immigration, I'm thinking about the family whose grandmother can't get a visa. When we're having a conversation about jobs and the economy, I'm thinking about the child who comes into my classroom and says, I'm changing schools because we have to move because we lost our house. So when we're talking about policies, I'm thinking about people. And that's what I would bring to Congress. That's how I would legislate. I would legislate on behalf of the people in this 5th district, the people in the state of Connecticut, the people in this country, not in support of an administration or a president or a policy that adversely affects the people in my community.
Thank you. Mr. Santos.
A lot of what's going on in Washington, D.C., and certainly in some other parts of our government has become very partisan, and that's troubling. To have disagreements just because of parties is a problem. But to a large extent, the disagreements that go on have also a lot to do with the difference in ideology, the difference in what policies will work. And the far majority of the Democrat Party just believes in something completely different from the Republicans. The Republican Party. So you're going to get this clash because the ideas are different. The solutions to the problems are different. But I would challenge you that think about what happens. So we have a party that has control of the Republican of Congress, but the Democrats don't want to participate. It's all resistance. It's all resist. Instead of coming to the table, negotiating things, they stay away. That's not partisan, or that's not bipartisan. It's partisan. Even if they disagree, they should come to the table and work things out. But too often, people don't do that.
Any further comments?
I would just say that I have the ability to disagree without being disagreeable. I mean, the only reason I'm sitting here right now in front of you today, the only reason I've had any success in my life is because I've had the ability to work with people from all different backgrounds, all different communities, all different ideologies, all different thoughts, experiences. But I think the other thing that I think is very important is when we're talking about the ability to connect and collaborate and communicate with people. Oh, my time's up. I'll get back to it.
Any further comments then?
Yeah, it is important to be able to discuss issues, even if we passionately disagree. It's important to hear the other side. It's important to hear all the sides, and then make a decision. We just can't close out the other side because right off the bat they're either Republican or Democrat or whatever. We got to at least make an effort to sit down and discuss these issues. And if we disagree, we disagree. But then let's have a vote. There's nothing wrong with that.
I think that we have to have some civil disagreement, though. I will say that in my campaign, I had a robust primary, and now going into the general, I've never made a disparaging remark about any of my opponents, never posted on my social media page, never spoke in a way that said because that we had different ideological thoughts, values, that there was something wrong with my opponent. My opponent, on the other hand, takes up every opportunity to call me out of my name, to talk about me in a disparaging way. That's not what this has to look like. We can disagree and still be respectful.
Thank you. We're going to go to one more question and then we'll return to the media for another round of questions. We'll do it in reverse order, and please, just the same question for each candidate this time. But we have one more question that we're going back to gun control issues, and it's a question, are you in favor of arming teachers? And we'll begin with Mr. Santos. Very specific.
I'm not sure what my opponent is talking about with disparaging remarks. Disparaging, maybe critical remarks, yeah, but no disparaging remarks from my campaign. What was the question?
Are you in favor of arming teachers, please?
Not necessarily, but I am in favor of allowing there was an idea being floated at the Department of Education to allow some programs, some funding to be used should the states choose to do so to fund the ability for the school districts to arm their teachers if they volunteered and if they chose to do so. I'd be in favor of allowing that to happen if the community and if the states think that that is the best solution for them. I'm not advocating that idea, but I think there's some value in allowing the flexibility for local school boards, or certainly the states first, to decide if that's something that works for their population.
Ms. Hayes.
I am not in favor of arming teachers. Not now, not ever. It does not make our community safer. And when you talk about a representative that will be the voice of the people in Connecticut's 5th congressional district, to have any conversation that begins with arming teachers is so incredibly tone deaf and does not recognize the hurt and the pain that this community is still dealing with on a daily basis. I worked in a high school with 1,300 children. I would never want the responsibility of securing a firearm in that building. I would never want to have to explain to a parent that I did not lock my desk, or I thought it was on my person, or I'm not sure how your child got a hold of my gun. My husband, again, is a police officer. I wouldn't want him to have to make the decision, is this an active shooter or is this a teacher in a building? It does not make our schools safer. And to take funds that were set aside for academic purposes and redirect them in order to buy firearms for a teacher, how do we keep up with training? How do we keep up with shooting, quality, making sure that people, by design, if you are in a school and you have to fire a gun, it is a crisis situation. To have someone without the background, without the skill, without the training, to be expected to react in a crisis situation where children are involved, where my child is in a building, is not the Connecticut that I want to be in, is not the country that I want to be in. So I will fight every piece of legislation that has any inkling of the idea of arming teachers.
Thank you. Thank you. Please. Thank you. Any further comments from either of the candidates?
That's only one solution, or at least one part of a larger solution. Why can't we even have a discussion that might be appropriate or not for some communities? Right now, just about every school is vulnerable. They're soft targets. This might be a reasonable step for some communities. I'm not saying it fits for everyone. I'm not saying it will work here in this district or in Connecticut, but it might work elsewhere.
Any further comments?
It will not work here. It is not reasonable. It will not work in this district or any other district. I've traveled all over the country, visiting schools, visiting districts. There are places where I know unequivocally we don't want to put more guns in people's hands. This does not make our community safe. It is dangerous. It is dangerous. And I hope that every single one of you replays the answer to this question when you go to vote on November 6th, because this is dangerous.
We'll now return to the media in reverse order. The first question will be for Ms. Hayes, and we'll start with Mr. Reiser of the News Times.
Thank you. One of the reasons, the reason that this is an open an open race this year is because the incumbent has admitted that she made grave mistakes in covering up a sexual abuse scandal in her own office. And while we wait for the results of an investigation that we don't know whether they're going to be public or when they're even going to happen, I'm wondering what specifically you can tell voters that you'll do differently and what you've learned from Elizabeth Este's example.
Ms. Hayes.
I think that I would call for transparency in these instances, but this is so much bigger than even Congresswoman Este. There needs to be protocols and procedures in place so that staffers on the Hill are protected, so that young women who go to work in any setting are protected. This isn't about one congressman or one congresswoman or one incident. We saw this play out last week during the Kavanaugh hearings. Had a system been put in place 25 years ago, maybe the response would have been different. We have to make it a priority to keep people safe in the workplace. So what would I do? Make sure that we have plans in place, protocols in place, procedures, so that if something were to come up, there is some direction and an expectation as to what is supposed to happen. Make sure it's followed through. Make sure that the people involved are removed from the situation and protected until an investigation, a thorough and quick investigation, can be done where people are able to be questioned and ask questions and we get all of the information. But to do nothing and continue to just wait until something happens and deal with these things on an individual basis has gotten us in trouble time and time again. We have to have policies that protect employees, both women and men, in the workplace.
Mr. Santos.
That's why it's very important that people get elected to Congress with a particular, with a character that that they can decide for themselves. Was this the right thing? And is it the right? Should I just allow this to happen? Because that's what happened. Mrs. Este knew that this occurred and did nothing, only until several months later. I would have removed that individual from the office. You can't have that kind of workplace. You just can't. The fact that this was allowed to happen and the investigation is still going on, evidently, with no transparency, is troubling. We do need to make sure that we hold our elected officials accountable for their actions. And when she did not come forward and say that there was a problem in her office and remove that individual that was being accused, is troubling. And that's why we need to have people in office that will stand up for things. When bad things happen, they need to act right away and not think about whether it will impact their reelection or not.
Comment?
No.
No. Okay, we'll go to our next question from Ms. Morrow, WLAD, and we'll begin with Mr. Santos.
What specific measures would you introduce to help tackle the opioid crisis?
This country is experiencing quite a crisis with the opioids, and there's been well over 50 bills in this year alone in Congress that have passed to address the opioid problems. And I would continue to support legislation that would help communities to combat it. One of the great things that did occur recently, and I'd be very supportive to even expand on, is legislation that allowed student debt forgiveness for individuals that graduate and enter the field of pain management. These kinds of things are very, very important to continue. I want to look at the DEA, though, in their decision a number of years ago to stop cracking down these pharmacies that were essentially distribution centers for medications. There was some investigation going on by the DEA, and something made them stop. I'm going to look at that again and figure out why that was, because the problem only got worse. It didn't get any better. When these facilities have an unusual ordering trend, they order by the millions instead of the hundreds or thousands. That should be a red flag for our law enforcement to go in there and investigate.
Time. Thank you. Ms. Hayes.
I think that we definitely have a crisis right now, not just in this district, but in the state and in this country. And I know what we cannot do is have a singular approach to this issue, which in my experience was punitive. You know, the opioid crisis that we're dealing with has been going on. This isn't new. You know, I grew up with this crisis, and there was one approach to it that was punitive. We have to have more education. We have to have more, you know, I was a part of a task force where the school district, the police, local officials work together to say, how do we make sure that we keep drugs off of our streets? Looking at pain management, the overprescribing of drugs by pharmaceutical companies and even some doctors for profit. You know, making sure that we can identify when people are in crisis before they get to the point where they are addicted or overdose and die. I've had many parents come to me and say, I suspect something is happening with my child, but I don't know what to do. My insurance doesn't cover it. I don't know where to take them. And they're asking for help, crying out, and there is no help available to them. We also have to have rehabilitative and transition services available for when people come out. Addiction does not end on the day where someone stops taking a pill or having a drink. This is a daily struggle that people have to deal with their entire life. So we have to have those supportive services when they re-enter the community to make sure that they stay on the path to sobriety.
I'm going to move to the next question from Ms. Graham, Western Connecticut State University, and we'll begin with Ms. Hayes.
The Tax Cut and Job Act of 2018 has improved our economy. However, essentially, it leaves the rich richer and the poor poorer. In what ways could a Tax Cut and Job Act be reformed to benefit everyone instead of the elite 1% of America and trickle down to the low-income Americans generation later?
Well, I think there's many provisions in this tax plan. And the first thing, once again, the job of a representative is to represent the people in this Connecticut district, in the 5th Congressional District. This tax plan disproportionately affects the people in our communities. There are other parts of the country that are seeing some successes from that plan, but not here. Our state and local taxes, the deductions that many people experience, have been all but eliminated. So in Connecticut, we are not benefiting the way other places around the country are benefiting from this plan. Also, generally, when you have a thriving economy, we collect more in taxes so that we don't have such a large deficit. This plan has us collecting less in taxes from the people who need it the least, and our deficit is only getting larger and larger. We have to have a government and an economy and policies that are more equitably distributed so that people pay their part. We should not be looking for the people who have the least to pay the most. You know, my opponent, talks a lot about how the economy is thriving and all of the advances, yet wages are stagnant. How is it that only business owners and the wealthiest are benefiting and the people who need it most are not moving? You know, we have places in the country where people are expected to live on $7.25 an hour. That's unreasonable. I can't do it. I don't know if someone else can. So we have to look at this plan and the parts that granted, the economy is doing better, but we have 93 months consecutive of growth in this economy. This administration didn't do that alone.
Mr. Santos.
The salt tax or the cap on the salt, it wasn't eliminated, it was just reduced. And it was reduced because the standard deductions were doubled. I would wager most of us here cannot find $24,000 worth of itemized deductions. So that's where it's up to right now. So the far majority of Connecticut residents can take advantage and simplify your income tax because of this Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And as far as wages, as an example, wages are not stagnant. Wages have increased. There's a slew of companies that have given increases to their employees solely because of this tax cut of 2017. There's jobs being created right now because of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. We've brought back well over $400 billion that was overseas is now here in the United States. Now that companies can now use that to invest and expand and provide jobs for those individuals who no longer or who haven't for such a long time been able to find a job. Now they can.
Thank you. Please, next, the last question from Mr. Voket of the Newtown Bee.
Could you please remind us first about your position on, and if elected, your intentions regarding the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau?
And we'll begin with Mr. Santos.
I'd like to review that bureau to make sure that it's doing what it was intended to do when it first was implemented a number of years ago. It may have provided some protection for consumers, but I want to make sure it's not impacting a lot more than just that. So I'd be willing to take a look at it and reevaluate it and frankly become more informed on it.
Ms. Hayes?
Again, I would say that we have policies and bureaus in place that disproportionately affect different groups of people. I would look at this as well to make sure that, in fact, consumers are the ones who are being protected. And many of these plans, as we see them being rolled out, reformatted, changed, it is the communities that struggle the most who are disproportionately affected. So I would want to make sure that, again, the protections are equitably distributed and do not impact people in the communities, the consumers, actually, who it was meant to protect.
Thank you. We will now go to closing statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes. We'll begin with Ms. Hayes. Your closing statements. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Pollack, and to the League of Conservation Women Voters for providing us with this opportunity to share our positions on so many topics that are incredibly important to me and to most of the people in this district. I think we have some clear choices going into the November 6th election, and the question is, what kind of a Connecticut do you want to live in? What kind of country do you want to see? One that aligns with our moral values and the idea that all people have value and should be here and should be protected. We can do those things and still balance the economy. This is not a zero-sum game. It's not one or the other. It's not the Second Amendment or safe communities. It's not healthcare or a thriving economy. It's not protections for our most marginalized communities or this idea that America comes first. All of those things can exist at the same place, at the same time. If we just value human dignity and civility, that's who we are. That's what makes us Americans. That's what I'm willing to fight for. This idea that you have to choose between those things is a fear tactic. We are a country who have lived on the promise of hope, who have been better than the generation before us every single time, at every turn. At our worst, we rose up and worked together and used our voices to help people who did not have a voice. This idea that we want to go back to some recycled version of the past where we begin to strip all those things away and tear things down and start all over is not who we are. I'm willing to fight for that. I'm willing to fight for you. I'm willing to fight for our communities, for our children, and keep the promises that we made as a country. This idea that we are a government of the people, for the people, by the people, and everybody has voice and everybody matters, and we elect leaders who will protect that very basic premise. You know, when we're talking about amendments, we have a First Amendment as well that is being disregarded at every turn. We have to have a government where people can disagree without being disagreeable, and all people are treated with value and respect.
Thank you. You may applaud. Thank you. Thank you. We'll go now to Mr. Santos' comment. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Mr. Santos, your 2-minute response, please. Your 2-minute closing statement, please.
Firstly, thank you all for taking the time to learn more about your choices in this year's election for Congress. The differences in my opponent's policies to mine cannot be more stark. That's because we have become a nation divided on what America is and will be. I know the bounty of this great nation because my mom and dad brought us out of real poverty and political prosecution into this land of unimaginable opportunity and freedom. With little to no formal education, my parents worked hard, fed, sheltered, clothed, and a family of 6. Only in America can someone like me now be up here seeking your support to represent you in Washington, D.C. This story, my story, and many of your stories as well, is now in danger of not repeating very often because too many are believing that we can provide Medicare for all and free college, which will bankrupt America and explode the size of the federal government. Believe in sanctuary cities and open borders that will allow anyone to enter our nation and become voting citizens. The condition we find our own state of Connecticut in is a direct result of destructive progressive policies fully implemented. Democrat policies being espoused by my opponents in a Democrat Party that is now embracing socialism. Our nation is currently experiencing a remarkable economy and an economic recovery due to pro-job principles focused on reducing burdens on businesses and families. We must not fall prey to slick emotional taglines, identity politics, and promises of so-called free stuff. Our societal problems are enormous, but solvable, not with more failed social programs, but with fewer, more effective ones. The election this November 6th will determine the America our children and grandchildren will grow up in. Today, you were presented with 2 visions for that America. I ask for your vote for the continuation of Americans' prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you all. I'd like to urge and remind you all of Election Day on November 6th. Please, democracy is not a spectator sport. Go out and vote. Thank you to our timers. Thank you very much. Thank you to our candidates, to the media, to the League of Women Voters, and most of all, thank you all for being here.
Welcome. Welcome back to Western Connecticut State University's Election Connection. I'm Jason Ferenzi.
And I'm David Kuhn, and we just saw a great debate.
It really was a great debate. I mean, first off, I think we should thank the League of Women Voters for having that. I think giving them the platform to talk about their stances and policies was great for all voters of this district. Yeah, right off the bat, they opened with gun control, and I thought that that's where really they were going to go. I thought that they wanted to see, you know, how they felt about those topics. And we saw Johanna really support, you know, any type of gun reform, you know, being the progressive Democrat that she is. She really wants to see in this district especially all that type of gun reform, and really to keep the guns out of the hands of the people who really she sees, a lot of Democrats see don't need them. And, you know, the point was made by Manny Santos that, you know, law-abiding citizens aren't really the ones that are in control. But then, you know, she came back with the whole incident at Sandy Hook. Adam Lanza was a law-abiding citizen.
Yeah, and of course he was a law-abiding citizen, and I'm surprised that Manny Santos didn't bring up the point that I don't think he was actually a gun owner, though. He did steal those weapons from his mother, although that's a detail, but he's definitely on point with the fact that a lot of these policies that Democrats are proposing, and gun control advocates in general, are targeting legal gun owners. And that's something that definitely resonates with the people who already support them. That's something that resonates with gun rights advocates. And it could be something that gives them a little bit of popularity in that demographic, I guess you'd say.
I definitely think that's something that really helped Manny out was, you know, he raised the question, you know, what's next after the Second Amendment? Because he was saying how, you know, he sees that, you know, if the Second Amendment is infringed upon, what's next? You know, possibly the First. I think that was kind of the step that he needed opening into the debate to kind of get those, you know, listeners on his side. But
they definitely both agreed on the issue of mental health reform, greater mental health care, and whatever else. So it was interesting to see them agreeing on something there. Although I think they had some differences in how exactly to go about it, but that was definitely you know, interesting to see actually some point of agreement, because later on things really did get heated in this debate.
They forked, absolutely, yeah. And then, you know, we had our very own Tamia Graham from Election Connection here ask her own question about affordable education. And, you know, Johanna really brought up the fact of, you know, we're allocating funds towards things aside from education that we need to. You know, the Pell Grant would cost, you know, the $26, I believe, million. You know, that's the same as they're estimating to build the wall. And, you know, they're saying that, you know, if we take those funds and invest them into the education system rather than closing our border to the south, you know, we could possibly see, you know, the education reform that everyone's talking about.
Yep, and Manny Santos definitely talked about the fact that one of the biggest issues we see in the ballooning of student loans and in tuition prices is due to the fact that people are taking out these loans that they can't necessarily afford. Now, it's interesting to see on a lot of these issues, it seemed like Manny Santos was very practical, very rational in his approach to a lot of these things, whereas Johanna Hayes was very focused on the individuals, on specific people, specific stories, and you know, really keeping in tune with you know, that democratic idea of being an advocate for the common people.
Yeah, and I mean, Manny even said himself, you have to be responsible enough to pay back that debt. You know, his argument really was, you know, these loans are being taken out for things that, you know, these students aren't necessarily able to pay back. But then again, he went on later in the debate to say that he is in favor of, you know, those grants for, you know, debt forgiveness for things that, you know, if you're going to study to fight the opioid crisis.
That was really interesting, and although that was later on, it did circle back around to the same thing, and I really found it surprising. I mean, I think it's a good idea, but it is surprising to see him
from him.
Yeah, it's surprising to see him advocating something that is basically a government program. But I could see the good effects of that, positive effects of that, because we do have such a huge issue with opioid addiction in this state, and you definitely saw the candidates focusing on that and making clear that they knew it was an issue.
Yeah, they both stated that it was an issue not only here but on a national scale too. You know.
Yep.
Yeah, and then, you know, both candidates went on talking about infrastructure and, you know, the infrastructure in Connecticut, and they both kind of resonated in the same wavelength there. They both kind of feel like there needs to be something done about the infrastructure in Connecticut, but I think they both had a different way of allocating those funds.
Well,
that
absolutely,
they want to see.
yeah. Johanna Hayes was talking about the fact that the federal government needs to step in and provide the funds that were promised and whatever else. Manny Santos talks about the fact that there's a little too much going on, I think, in the state as far as infrastructure is concerned, and or too much being talked about, not enough done.
Absolutely. And we actually have Joseph Oliveri standing by with Manny Santos from the debate. Joseph, how you doing?
We're doing well. I'm here with former Meriden, Connecticut Mayor and 5th Congressional GOP District candidate, Mr. Manny Santos. Mr. Santos, thanks so much for joining us this evening. How would you say that this debate went for you? Anything that you would have changed?
No, the questions were, you know, for the most part, okay. You know, it gave us the opportunity to share our thoughts or our beliefs, and now it'll be up to the voters. We do have one other, at least one other scheduled debate coming up tomorrow. Trying to schedule a third one next week, and we'll see how that one goes.
You've talked a lot about immigration. It's a very contentious issue in this race. You've talked about rescinding DACA benefits, and you've also talked about a path to legalization and non-citizenship. What would a model of that path actually look like to you if it were to be implemented by either the state or the federal level?
You said rescind DACA. The way you mentioned.
You've talked about, as with regard to immigration, that
rescinding DACA benefits.
Correct.
No, in fact, my proposal would expand on that. So the problem with DACA is that it's an executive order, and it just delays everything. There's no process, there's no clear process for anything for DACA. So what I'm proposing is a clear and rigorous path to legalization, a green card essentially, where they can remain here legally. The stipulation is that they are productive, they're out of trouble, not committing crime, and they're either working or being educated, or going to school. Because these are, after all, individuals that came here at a very young age, with no fault of their own. Their parents brought them here illegally. And these are individuals that grew up in our own country. We're not going to deport them. So I think it's a worthwhile, a very worthy compromise, if you will, provide a path to legalization, not citizenship. I am opposed to if you enter the country illegally, undocumented, there should be consequences. And one of those consequences is you do not become a voting citizen.
You've also talked about in this race, and something that's been going on in the other races going on in the state, such as the governor, criminal justice, as well as the treatment of criminals. The Republican candidate for Governor, Bob Sebastian, is thinking of taking away the Second Chance Initiative, which is a program that keeps convicts outside of prison and has a more distributive justice approach in order to keep them out of jail before their trials. What are your thoughts on the Second Chance Initiative? How that should be used? Should it be kept? Should it be amended? And do you think that a program similar to that could be used in the future?
I think it's worth at least looking at to the statistics just to make sure that it's effective. And if it's an effective program, I'd be willing to consider it at the federal level. One of the really concerning aspects of it is the early release program that's also built into that second chance initiative. And the early release program has been a failure here in this state. So that aside, yeah, I'd be willing to at least consider it, take a look at it, and find out more about it.
Another issue that's been
talk to that question. We're going to bring it back to the studio. Thank you so much, though.
All right, well, Mr. Santos, thanks so much for joining us. And for those watching at home, don't forget to watch our live broadcast on Election Night, Tuesday, November 6th, on Charter Channel 192, WXCI, our campus news radio station, as well as Comcast Channel 97. Mr. Santos, thanks so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Happy night.
Yeah, I mean, that was great. The biggest thing that Santos was saying in terms of immigration and kind of controlling the immigration problem that we're seeing was with DACA individuals that he thinks there should be a path to legalization, but not to citizenship. You know, he thinks that these immigrants that, you know, may have came here illegally should have the right to stay here, but maybe they shouldn't receive all the rights that legal citizens or even legal aliens should have.
Yeah, and I think it's something that makes a lot of sense. He's not talking about some sort of Reagan-esque amnesty program. He's talking about, and he said it right there, a rigorous program that doesn't lead to a path to citizenship, but it leads to a path to legalization. Mm-hmm. So this is a good thing for the people currently stuck in limbo, which is what a lot of the DACA recipients are. And you know, what DACA does basically is allows them to stay in the country as long as that program is available. And I think it was rescinded, but right now federal courts have ruled that they're still protected in a way. So they're really stuck in a very unsecure place. So if he would be a strong advocate for this in Congress, I think it would be a great thing for immigration in general and actually finding a solution to this issue, especially for people who were brought here as kids who had no real bearing in the situation themselves. I think he's got a good argument in that particular issue.
Yeah, and it really does differ from Johanna Hayes' stance on it, where she thinks that there should be a path for them to citizenship. You know, that these children under DACA, you know, they didn't really choose, like you said, you know, they didn't really choose to come to this country legally, illegally, but, you know, they should probably receive the same rights as any to maintain citizenship or to gain citizenship. So I think that's really where they differ, is the legalization versus citizenship.
Yeah, and that's true. That's true for both candidates and for both parties on the wider scale as well.
Yeah, and then, you know, just creating pathways to citizenship as well as legalization was something that we heard a lot from both of them. You know, whether or not it was one or the other, we heard from both of them that they do want something to be done to, like you said, get these people out of limbo.
Absolutely, and speaking more broadly rather than just about you know, the children who are brought here and are here illegally, I think it's a good point he brings up in saying that why do we want to necessarily be rewarding people who came here illegally? Let's put them through a rigorous process. Let's give them legal status, but not necessarily citizenship.
Yeah, I mean, it's something to look into. But we have Stephanie Shaw right now with some people that were just at the debate, and they have some thoughts on what happened. So Stephanie, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hi, I'm Stephanie Shaw, live at the Portuguese Cultural Center where the debate between Johanna Hayes and Manny Santos just ended. I have that just attended the I think that from that debate, you're going to be like, do you want to go somewhere where I'll help you. Spoken, it's important to see. Okay, so they already got that number.
We're having a few technical issues, so we're going to have to bring it to the studio for now. But I think, you know, you heard sometimes the League of Women Voters got a little upset at the audience there, but I think there was a lot of support for Johanna tonight and what she was saying, and I think the crowd really stood behind her.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think the League of Women Voters, despite the fact that they say they're nonpartisan, whatever else, and I was going to say, it definitely seems like they attracted more female support, and she definitely has the female support. But yeah, the crowd was definitely in favor of Johanna Hayes.
Yeah, and you know they're going to be debating tomorrow night as well, so I think maybe they won't see the same amount of enthusiasm after tonight. That was very enthusiastic, but I think tomorrow again they'll see more support for Johanna than they will for Manny. And another big subject that they talk about, you know, they talked about the single-payer health care. You know, that's what we predicted something, you know, the healthcare system in America right now, that we really thought that there would be a rigorous kind of debate. So I guess what was really Manny's pull away from that?
Well, Manny Santos talked a lot about the fact that the Affordable Care Act did not work out how it was predicted to. Premiums went up. People weren't able to keep their doctors. Competition decreased rather than increased in the marketplace. So, you know, his approach is basically, like we talked about before, a more free market approach to healthcare. And one of the big things he advocates for is being able to buy and sell insurance across state lines. And he was definitely in favor of Trump's recent executive order, which allows more people to group together as businesses or trade groups and buy and sell insurance over state lines. So it's a huge contrast to Hayes, who is a very strong proponent of single-payer health care.
Yeah, and you know, she was saying things like people shouldn't have to worry about, you know, losing everything, their home, their job, all because of an injury or, you know, a pre-existing condition. You know, I think she's coming from a place where she believes, in a more democratic belief, that, you know, healthcare really shouldn't have to be a worry of the American people. It should really be, you know, something that's inherent in our society, and it really shouldn't be, and it's idealized, but I think, you know, she thinks that it's not something that we should have to worry about on a daily basis like we kind of do today.
Yeah, and that was definitely her argument for, you know, once again, the very people-based approach.
Yeah.
And Santos's rebuttal to that was basically, this is a nice idea, but how are we going to afford it?
Yeah, his biggest thing right after that, his rebuttal to that was we just can't afford that. You know, it is a good idea. It's a great standard to hold, but we can't afford it.
Yeah,
you know?
And he talked about the same thing as far as education as well. She's an advocate for, you know, reduced college fees, all these kinds of things, student debt relief. And he basically said, you know, once again, where is this money coming from?
Yeah. Yeah. But we're going to go to a quick weather report from Paul Taschereau.
And here's a last look at the weather. Unfortunately, we're going to talk about a taste of winter. We're going to see low temperatures over the next few nights flirt around freezing. So if you have plans, be sure to bring them indoors. We're talking about highs only in the 40s on Thursday with gusty winds. And for this weekend, we're going to see a brief warm-up Friday and Saturday before temperatures fall back down to the 40s for Sunday. And this is a final look at your weather. Let's give it back over to the desk.
I think something that we didn't really anticipate to hear from this debate was climate change.
Yeah, we definitely, it's something that seems to be overlooked, but it's definitely being talked about throughout the country. And we just had a report come out from the UN in the past week talking about the severity of climate change and encouraging governments to do more to tackle the issue. So it's definitely something that's being talked about.
Yeah, and while there were different things said, I think a common difference between them on climate change was that Johanna believes that man really is a large contributor to, you know, the global climate change that we're seeing, and that there needs to be more regulation to, you know, what businesses are outputting in terms of just harm to the environment. And whereas Manny came over and he was more on the side of, you know, this isn't all or majority human-made, you know, there isn't, you know, room, or there is room to have a balance with the environment and with regulation.
Yeah, and yeah, like you said, regulation was one of the biggest things he talked about on the climate change issue. He talked about the huge burden it puts on businesses, and he pointed out specifically farmers in the 5th Congressional District are severely overburdened by a lot of environmental regulations. And you know, his focus is basically whether or not this is an issue that's human-made, whatever else.
Manufactured.
If we focus on policies that are tackling this issue, it will have an adverse effect towards businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have Jason Simontilli standing live at the Portuguese Cultural Center. Jason, can you hear us? I know we've been having some technical difficulties.
Yes, I can hear you, Jason.
All right, you're coming in loud and clear in the studio. That's fantastic. So, Jason, why don't you tell us what really stood out to who's standing next to you at the debate?
I'm standing here with Cindy. Cindy, what did you take away from today's debate?
What today's debate showed me how much I support Johanna Hayes. I have supported Johanna since she went into the primary, and hearing her speak today with the passion and the understanding of what the issues are to make her presence known was very impacting. Johanna, the end, how she had her last ending with her articulation of her message so clearly, to be able to deliver it as strongly as she did was a culmination for me. But Johanna is a person who speaks from her heart. She has integrity, she has character, she continues to carry the same message of how she cares about people. I know that when I've spoken to her personally, she shared the story of when she had a student who had a toothache and didn't get to the hospital, which resulted in that individual having to have legs amputated. So when she spoke about it in today's event, I had an even stronger understanding of what it meant. Johanna has not separated from her first message, that she really cares, that she's committed, that she will support doing what's right as a candidate or getting elected to Congress and fighting the fight, which is rare in today's political arena. I don't think there's many candidates in the nation that will do that, and I am so pleased to have an opportunity to support her. Her rise has been meteoric, because having supported her against Glassman and having her been really clear and having her seen how she has polished herself with her issues to present it as strongly as she did today shows me how committed she is to what why she's running for Congress.
So from what you heard today, was there anything else that you wish that Johanna had brought up? Any policies or any issues?
That's a really good question. At this point in time, I think Johanna knows what her issue, what her platform is, and what she wants to address. So I don't see anything different. I just think she's gotten a lot stronger in how she understands what they are and how she will work towards changing them. That was in opposition and contrasted really strongly to Santos. That was his name, correct? Because in watching him in this debate, I call it a political pivot. And watching him not know what the policy, not having a policy, not knowing what the issues were, not being able to answer the questions, and not saying anything substantive to support anything of importance, was so contrasted to how Johanna was clear, sharp, articulated, and was able to lead the was it a debate? I question whether these things are debates anymore. But Johanna led it, and Johanna led it, and she was able to respond clearly, sharply, and persuasively.
Well, great, Cindy. That's all the questions I have. This is Jason Sementelli with Election Connection. Back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you, Jason. You know, I think it was really vital to Johanna to have that stage presence. I think that she did a much better job really articulating her ideas out and kind of getting them out in a neater way than Manny might have. You know, he stumbled a little. I'm not saying he didn't know where he stood, but I feel like he didn't really have that kind of stage presence that we were kind of hoping for him to get that, you know, the votes that he might have needed to get.
Yeah, absolutely. Johanna came off as a lot more enthusiastic, I would say. Manny was very, he was articulate, but he was much more deliberate.
He was very
much
down
more
to the
rational
fact,
in his arguments. Johanna Hayes really brought up those emotional, anecdotal stories to back up a lot of the subjects she was talking about. Whereas Manny was very much to the facts, very much to the core of the issues, and not necessarily, you know, bringing in personal stories like Johanna was.
Yeah. So what do you think stood out to you the most from this debate?
I would say the attitudes of both of the candidates. As far as the debate itself was concerned, just exactly what we were talking about. The fact that Johanna was much more enthusiastic. I would say a bit more, you know, talking back and forth with the audience, getting more reactions from them. Whereas Manny was, like I said before, very deliberate, very rational. Which could be a good thing if that's what people are looking for. But if you're talking about getting people excited, getting people motivated, Johanna may have done a bit better of a job with that.
I would definitely have to agree. I really think that she, I don't want to say stood her ground, but I feel like she had a level of confidence that really helped her with those anecdotes and with those stories. I feel like she really had that way of talking to really get the crowd behind her. Like we saw several times, the crowd just couldn't contain themselves, you know, albeit it wasn't allowed, but you know, that really wasn't going to stop them from really feeling what she had to say. And I think that's what we can take away from this debate, really how they spoke, and really from how they're going to work out these issues if they get in.
Yeah, I would say Santos did a good job of explaining the rationality behind the arguments he was making, but didn't necessarily get that energy behind it. I thought one of the interesting points was when they were talking about women's health issues. Johanna Hayes was talking about the fact that women's health should not be rolled back, all these kinds of things. Santos brought up the point. He said, when we're talking about women's health, let's be serious, we're talking about abortion.
Yeah, it seemed like women's health kind of became code word for the subject of abortion.
Yeah, and that's when he made a very strong statement saying he's not a supporter of abortion, but does recognize the fact that it's settled law. So
yeah, I mean, it was bold, really, to I guess, come out and say that after not even being coaxed about the idea of abortion.
And once again, the question arises, how popular of a position is that with the voters of the 5th Congressional District?
Yeah, and I think it was important, Johanna said herself, that priorities are determined by who was in the room when she was speaking of the members of Congress and members of, who are in power. I think that she really hopes, in terms of specifically women's health, to get more women, and we're seeing more women running for office this year specifically, to get them really involved and to get them talking and communicating. Not to say that the male counterpart of the political side isn't talking about issues of women's health, but I think it'll be important for women voters to hear that, having that voice in Congress and having it heard. I think that's really going to help the voter turnout, at least for women, for Johanna.
Yeah, well, it's definitely happening. One way or another, it's happening. Another strong point I thought for Santos is when they brought up the topic of marginalized groups. They talked about people with special needs, LGBT individual, or excuse me, it was transgender individuals, and he basically came to the conclusion that we shouldn't be focusing on the divisions in our country. We shouldn't be focusing on everybody's identities. We should be focusing on what holds us together. And Hayes came back with the point that those things are important. We're not all the same. But I was impressed by Santos's very unifying message on that subject.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like in a similarly unifying way, Johanna came at it like we are all different and we should embrace a unity in our difference. I think that's really where she was trying to come from, because on the Democratic side, she's really trying to push for those social equalities and really trying to, within the LGBT plus community.
Yeah, it was amazing.
And actually, I'm going to have to cut you off.
Oh,
we actually have Johanna Hayes standing right now with Joseph Oliveri. Joseph, how you doing?
Well, we're here with 5th Congressional District Democratic candidate Johanna Hayes. Ms. Hayes, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us tonight. You talked about civility and you talked about compromise in this debate. Is there a Trump administration policy that you would be your first choice as something to open up a dialogue about compromise with the Republicans in Washington or in the state?
I think every one of the policies that are coming out require some civility inserted and some compromise. No work is getting done. I think for me, some of the things that are happening with education are incredibly dangerous. I think we have to look very closely at healthcare, because there are people in the state that are relying on some improvement or some movement. And thinking about this economy that we hear so much about, making sure that access to those opportunities are available for everyone. I'm willing to work with anyone from any side who has good ideas that are going to benefit the people in this district.
You're running on what's called a progressive platform. You're running on a program that many people call progressive. There is a voice in the progressive base in the country that has been calling for taking care of the Immigration Customs Enforcement. Do you see ICE as a necessary entity in the United States, and should it continue to exist in the capacity that it does?
Well, on some things I'm very progressive. On other things I'm a lot more moderate. I think that government is about people and has a responsibility to protect people. And then people, when they can stand, invest in our communities, invest in our economy, are active participants in our government. I think that the job that Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency needs to exist. Absolutely. They have many, many jobs, but to exist for the sole purpose of, stopping people from coming who want to seek asylum in this country, of separating parents from children, that's not what that agency was set up to do. If we looked at, okay, how do we make sure that we can offer multiple and robust pathways to citizenship in a more timely manner and begin to direct our attention in other areas? I'm not saying that the agency should go away or our borders should not be protected. Absolutely not. I want a safe America just like everyone else. I just want one that is humane and civil at the same time.
And lastly, what are some of the newer things on the campaign trail, visiting the towns that are in this district? What are the new discoveries that you've made as far as the issues that are affecting the people who live here that you weren't necessarily cognizant of before going into this race, beginning your political journey?
I don't think there's anything that was a surprise. I think just the opposite. I am surprised that we are so similar, that the people who live in Waterbury care about
the air they breathe and the environment and their children's health, just like the people who live on rural farming communities. I see that, women across the district have some serious concerns about the ability to choose what happens with their bodies, that many parents, mothers, fathers are concerned about the idea of school safety. So for as much as people think that we're different throughout this district, at the end of the day, we're much more similar. People want the same things. They care about the same things. They want to help each other. And I think that, for me, really refilled my cup and reminded me of the good that rests in people. We have tremendous people in this district from all walks of life, all backgrounds, who want the same things. And that's for our communities to be better.
Johanna Hayes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jason, David, back to you.
Wow, thank you very much.
Thank you, man.
Wow, that was, he got both candidates. That's, I'd love to see him in the coming weeks. And get, I believe he's covering the gubernatorial candidates, Ned Lamont and Bob Stefanowski. And I mean, if we can get him to talk to them, but that's in the coming weeks.
Well done, Joseph.
Absolutely.
I think it was an interesting comment that Johanna made at the end there, saying that there's a lot of unity throughout the district. She talks about things like school safety, environmental issues. Although at the same time, when she says people care about the air we breathe in Waterbury, whatever else, she doesn't seem to acknowledge the fact that there's also people who farm in the district that are adversely affected by environmental regulations, just like Manny Santos says. She doesn't seem to acknowledge the fact that there's gun owners in the district who worry about their gun rights being rescinded. So I don't know how truthful that statement is.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing that she was very staunch on was when they were debating arming teachers, and the idea of bringing guns into the schools for teachers to be able to defend themselves as well as their students. She said that she is not in favor of that action at all, at any expense, and that topic to even come up in the 5th district, with Newtown being in this district, is very tone deaf. And it was interesting to see how Manny's side was. He as well isn't really in favor of having teachers armed, but he really doesn't believe that it should be the federal government's decision. He thinks that there are more states that might, or communities and states that might want to take advantage of that, and they might find ways to make it work.
And that's the one thing I think is lost in the debate about arming teachers, is that it's not a requirement for teachers to carry firearms. It's on a voluntary basis for those who want to go through the training, those who have concealed carry permits, whatever else. It's not a matter of the federal government stepping in and telling all teachers that they need to pack a weapon all the time. So, yeah, Manny Santos's point is good in saying that it should be on a local level. People who want to do it, don't force this on anybody. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, we did hear the heart-wrenching stories that what if they got in my desk? I don't know. How do I talk to the parent if something were to happen in my classroom if I had a gun? So there again, we saw Hayes really trying to pull on the emotional side of the voters, and I really think it worked. I really believe that she garnered a lot of support from this debate.
Well, I think the biggest thing to take out of it is if you're already a Republican, you're probably still going to vote Manny Santos. He didn't say anything to push you in the other direction. I don't think Johanna Hayes said anything that's going to push Republicans the other direction. So
no, I mean, we really covered a lot of what they were going to say. From their policies. This close to the election, it's not like they're going to flip on one or two of the policies. I really believe that we're going to see the projected numbers of voting for both of those candidates. The Republicans who want to vote for Santos are going to vote for him. The Democrats who want to vote for Hayes are going to vote for her. I think you're right in that aspect.
Yeah, I guess the point is they didn't really tell us too much more than we already knew. But it was interesting to see how they carried themselves on stage. We did get somewhat more elaboration on the policy positions.
It was interesting to see them together as well, which was something that I think the voters really needed to see tonight.
Yep.
And they'll need to see tomorrow night too, when they do it again. So I think tonight was very good for both of them.
I don't think there was too many negatives necessarily. They both said what they needed to say. I think Manny, on some of his rebuttals, could have been stronger. I don't know if he necessarily refuted the right points in some cases.
Yeah.
But yeah, he did a decent job overall.
And this is Western Connecticut State University's Election Connection. I'm Jason Ferenzi.
And I'm David Cohn.
And this has been the 5th District Congressional Debate. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to watch for the remaining weeks.